Begin the Quran Daf Mesech the site Daf Mem Daled. Begin 11 lines down at the top of the Yamid. We continue the halacha the Mishnah, which the Mishnah quoted the pasuk of who's the man that got engaged, because this relates to the halacha of Meshuach Mochama, which really is connected to the previous parak of El Namach, which we went through a list of things that are said either Lashon Kodesh or B'chol Lashon. And one of the things about Lashon Kodesh was the Meshuach Mochama. When he goes out to fight the war, you have the kohen that's anointed specifically for that job of making announcements. And one of the announcements is, okay, who doesn't get to fight in the war was someone who was engaged. And now Gemara is going to continue explaining the parameters of this person who is getting a new wife that doesn't fight the war. Shiur corresponds to Bekazach and Cheskel, turn to Daf Chaim. Christian, I'm joining for today's daf. Some of the discussing today's daf are, like we mentioned, there's a few categories of people that are told that they're not going to go fight. He built a new house, he didn't inaugurate it yet. Nothing he planted a vineyard, he didn't deconsecrate it yet. And he got engaged to a woman, he didn't even marry her yet. The Gemara has a machlekes regarding the meaning of hayar v'rachalevav, the one who's afraid and soft of heart, who's also exempt from joining the war. What does it exactly mean? He also differentiates between Melchemes Reshus, a voluntary war, and Melchemes Mitzvah, a mitzvah, an obligatory war. Also, starting the next parak, the halach of Egla Rufa, which is also one of those that are the Mar B'Lashon HaKodesh, and that the Bezdin has to go out to the site, measure the distances around the Chal, determine the closest city, and they're the city that bring the Egla Rufa. The Mishnah also discussed the number of Sanhedrin members who go out to the site, and also some other halachas, as we'll see, regarding what's considered the person who dies, specific criterion that qualify for the halacha of Egla Rufa. So begin the current Daf Mem Dal, 11 lines down by the top of the Yamid. Our Mishnah had said 3 categories that we said that are coming back. One of them was Iris Isha B'Leila Kacha. So the Mishnah had quoted, as our Gemara quotes the pasuk, Mio Isha She'eris Isha B'Chulu, who is the man that got engaged to a woman, etc. You're not going to go fight in the war. So turn it on, like we did regarding the other 2 categories on the previous daf. The Gemara qualifies and says it's not just the simple understanding. There's a few more things that are included in this category. So Ashet Edis, when the pasuk says who's the man that got engaged, whether you're getting engaged to, you got engaged to a virgin, whether someone got engaged to a widow, and even if he didn't get engaged to her, she came to him from his brother who died without any children, and she's waiting for yibum from him. And more than that, even if there's 5 brothers who one of them died in the war, kulon chayzrin, they all go back because possibly there's like an engagement over here because there's the zika of yibum, and one of them might be, so they actually all go back. That's one half. That's on the words of Asher Eires. Then it says in the pasuk that this person, Asher Eires Isha, v'loy kacha. So it doesn't say loy lakach, which is really what it could have said. It says loy lakacha. What does v'loy lakacha coming to teach us? That it's a miut to tell us he didn't take her, but it's coming to exclude a lekicha that is prohibited. And we said the same thing regarding the other 2 categories in the previous daf, regarding the case of the bias and regarding the case of the kerem. We said regarding if it was stolen, regarding different prohibited elements. So here also, loy lekacha is teaching us prat la malika and gadol. This excludes if a widow gets married to the high priest. Grusha l'chutz l'kohen hedger, if a divorcee and a chalutza get married to a regular kohen. Or mamzeres and nesina, which mamzeres we know is the child of a forbidden union of kares of the parents. And the sin is from the Gevadim that it says in Sefer Yeshua, "Vayitnam Yehushu l'chayt ve'etzim." Yeshua gave them over to be wood choppers, which they're from the 7 nations. Really, they were supposed to be wiped out. So they're called the Nesina or Nesina because it was Vayitnam Yeshua. So, but they're prohibited. And if they get married to Yisrael, to a Jewish man, or the other way, Bas Yisrael, a Jewish woman gets married to Mamzel Nasan, these are all prohibited unions. They're excluded from V'loy L'kacha. They're not going to have this exemption of coming back. Oh, wait a second. It says the Gemara, let us say, you're saying that if someone has a prohibited marriage, they're not exempt? That's not going to be included in being engaged and not having married to come back, and they're going to fight in the war? Oh, let's say, and this we said this on the previous stuff too, the loy kabir lili. Why? The kabir lili is going to kabir lili. But he says in translation of hayad v'dachalebav, who is it that the kohen Meshuach makes an announcement and says, okay, whoever's afraid and soft of heart, you're not going to fight. We don't want people like you in the army. Now, what type of fear is it? He says it's a spiritual fear. It refers to someone who's afraid of the sins in his hands. Wait a second. If you would hold like Rabbi Galili, then like we would say yes for a different reason, but yeah, you would be exempt simply because you're Yoreh Barach Alevav. So obviously that the Mishnah is not like him. So the Gemara, no, I feel the Rabbi Galili. You could even say the Bryce is like Rabbi Galili, because Kedarabba, the Rabbi says a person is not liable. It's not considered a sin regarding the kedushin until they actually have bia cohabitation, where he brings his children or the woman to a situation of chilul by having a bia. Now, mamzeres and nesina, there's no avera by kedushin because it doesn't say lo yikach, it just says lo yavai. It says lo tischatin. Don't cohabit, don't have a marital relationship. But a widow, it says lo yikach, don't take. And kicha is kedushin. That's why we needed Rabbah to say that don't say from a kedushin you did an isser. In other words, Rashi is just addressing, he's saying the other cases, well, that we know is only until you do bia. But the chiddush of Rabbah is for the case of the Amon Lekar and Gadol, where that the Torah seems to say the isser is the taking, and then he says no, there is no liability until you do bia. Now, matam, what's the reason for this? Because the pasuk says in Vayikra, when it talks about Amana Grusha V'Chalola Zoyin Es Eila, the pasuk says Lo Yikach, the kohen shouldn't take. Now, Mishum, what's the reason? Because the next pasuk says Lo Yichal, don't desecrate. Oh, Mishum Hachi and Aleika, therefore you're not going to get lashes at Yivul, because when's the Chilul happen? Chilul happens when you're going to make Chalolim, little children coming out of this. It's only when you have Bia. And the woman only becomes a Mechulelas when you have Bia. Oh, so therefore, that's why you're not going to come back because of the sin of a Yoreh Barach Aleva from the Avera Shebeyadai, because it's not the Avera Shebeyadai until you actually do Bia. So it could be like a Bisa Glili. And it's talking about where you didn't do Bia yet, and that's why it's not qualified Yoreh Barach Aleva. And it's not also included for the halacha of Asher Edis Lo Lekacha, because Lo Lekacha excludes if it's a prohibited marriage. Now, so now the Gemara sums up all the three cases we had spoken about that the Torah says about building a house and planting a vineyard and getting him married. So learn the Brisa. It says the order, Asher Bana, the one who built, Asher Nota, the one who planted, and it says Asher Edis, the one that got engaged. That's the order the Torah says about people that, okay, exempt, because you didn't consummate what you started. But lim the Torah derechas, the Torah is teaching you the proper conduct. Sheyivna adam bayis. First, the person should build a house. V'yitikadim, then they should plant the vineyard. V'acher kach yisa isha, and then they should marry a woman. Rav Shloimo b'chachmasa, and that's how Shlomo says in his wisdom in the pasuk in Mishlei. Hochin b'chutz malachdecha, prepare on the outside your work. V'atidah b'sadelach, and prepare the field for you. And then afterwards go and build your house. What does this mean? So Zok the Gemara. Prepare on the outside your work. Zebais. That's on the outside. That's your house. Build your house first. Then prepare the field for you. Zekerim. That's your vineyard. And then afterwards build your house. Zu Isha. That refers to the woman, as the woman is the Ikeres Abayis. And therefore you see that that's the order. First build your house, make your vineyard, and then get married. Another interpretation of that pasuk, it's actually more spiritual, is prepare on the outside your work, zemikra. That's pasuk, which is the most superficial, so to speak. It's the most on the outside. And then prepare the field for you, zemishnah. That's the Mishnah, which is already doing some more plowing over here. And then afterwards build your house. Then it's like the finishing touch, Ze Gemara, that refers to give logic, to understand the reasonings of the Mishnah and who's the halacha like. That's what the pasuk is allegorically referring to. Another pshat, prepare on the outside your work, is a mikra Mishnah. It refers to the oral law and the written law. Both are on the outside. Those are the basic texts. Then the and then prepare the field for you, Ze Gemara. That's already the more digging. That's the Gemara. And then when it says Achar B'nisa B'Sechah, then afterwards build your house. Elu Maisim Toivim. The whole point of learning is almanas lasis. That's the finishing touch, is the good deeds based on what you learned. He says a different shot. He says one step further out. He says, no, prepare on the outside your work. Mikro, Mishnah, Gemara. That's the basics. Chumash, Mishnah, and Gemara. And prepare the field to Elamaisim Taivim. That refers to the good action. Afterwards, go and build your house. Dorush b'kibul schar. That means to say, to expound and to receive reward. And that's the building of the house, is giving drushes and receiving reward for that. Now the Mishnah said, "Ve'elu she'enu chayzin." Now the following, although we had mentioned that there are certain individuals that they don't come back, meaning we said those who come back, and then we said that those who don't come back. For example, all three categories had situations where even if you are going to have these categories that come back, but in those categories, let's say we said if someone builds a gatehouse, so we said, okay, that's not qualified as a house, that's not going to take you back. Rabbi Huda said, even not if it's on the same place. He says, even if, let's say, you destroy your house and you rebuild it, so that's not going to qualify for a new house. On that halacha, Tana within the Brisa, but in Hoisif by Dimus Echad, if a guy, he tore down his house, he rebuilt it again, the same, but he added on one row of bricks, whether in the height or whether in the thickness, that's not considered anymore al-machaynoi, it's not considered exactly as it was, and that would be considered as a bayis chadash, and chayzer, then he would come back, because that's considered bana bayis v'loy chanachai, just for that one extra row of bricks already makes it into a new house. Now, in the Mishnah we said, he says, even if someone builds a house of bricks in the Sharon region, he wouldn't come back for that. Wouldn't be good enough of like a Nebuchadnezzar that this guy never got a chance to inaugurate his house if he would die in war. Why? Because they would renew these houses, they wouldn't last. They would renew it pamayim b'shavua 2 times in the Shemitah cycle. So every 3.5 years around, or whatever it was, they would have to make the house would just crumble, and therefore it's not considered such a significant house, and therefore not an exemption from fighting in the war. Now, the Mishnah said that these are all cases of that you go to the border, but then you come back. Then the Mishnah said, then we have those who they don't even move from their place. To the contrary, if someone actually built the house, he has been living in it, but for less than a year. Or not the kermachilloi, he was eating its fruit, but less than a year. He got engaged and he got married, but it's less than Shodah B'Shoina. Then we said that they don't even go to the border and come back. They don't even leave their place. They're staying at home. The Brisa, it said in the pasuk Isha Chadasha, a new wife. Now, only Isha Chadasha. I would only know a new wife, meaning like a basula, a single girl. Almano Gerusha, a widow or divorcee from someone else, obviously, not his own, and then he marries her. Where do we know that even that is considered a new wife? So that Tamalayma that the pasuk teaches is Isha. It says a woman. That's Mukamakum. That's in all situations. Then why are you saying a new wife? If you're saying she's not new, she's been already once a wife. Says the Gemara, Mishchadashaloi. We're talking about that if it's new for him, that excludes if he's remarrying the woman he divorced, it's not new to him. So as long as it's for him a new wife, that would qualify for the halacha of Eres Isha B'loi L'kacha. If there's no of Shana Rishona. Right, with Sibna, whatever is that the same pasuk as there? Either way, here it doesn't qualify for this halacha of Isha Chadasha. The pasuk explicitly telling you for this halacha of Chayzim Archa Balchama, it has to be Isha Chadasha. But that is the source of the halacha anyway, of a Simcha Chasishte, which seems to be over here by the Isha Chadasha. So turn about in the Brisa, pasuk says in the Devarim, it says this pasuk, Ki yikach Isha Chadasha, and the man's going to take a new wife. So it says there in the pasuk, lo yetze batzava. He doesn't go out into the army. Oh, so Yachal, you would think, okay, but Savahu de lo yatza. Okay, he's not going to go out to fight in the army, but but he has to do like all those other ones that we spoke about to provide water and food and fix the roads. No, it says that it's not going to go over for him for anything. So he doesn't have to do anything. So you would think that I would include afaboy the bias. So to someone that built a house, a new house, and he didn't inaugurate it, or if he planted a vineyard, he didn't deconsecrate it, or if he got engaged to a woman, but he didn't marry her yet, you would think it would be the same thing, that they would be totally exempt from everything. No, Allah, it says on him, meaning Allah for the person that already got married. He's not engaged and not married yet. He got married, he just didn't finish on the Rishayna. That's where you don't put any wartime obligations on him at all. But all the other ones, they will have to do at least some basic assistance, although they're not going to actually be fighting in the war. Now, the question is, and the fact that it says even lo yavar, that you don't put anything on him, not even to provide for the food for the soldiers. So why do I need the person that doesn't go out to fight in the war? He's not even doing even the basics for even the civilian type of obligations. So the Gemara Lav said he gets two negative prohibitions. One is if he helps out, and then the second one, if he's fighting, then it's going to be another negative prohibition. Now the Gemara continues with the next Mishnah regarding the halacha of the Meshuach Milchama, regarding the announcements that they would make. So the Mishnah quotes the pasuk that is regarding the officers, that the officers make this announcement that says v'yasva hashoitrim, that the officers, they add on to the words of the Kohen, that's the Meshuach Milchama, l'daber ela'am v'gomer, to speak to the people, etc., which the pasuk says over there. V'amru, they said, mio ish hayodei b'rachaleibov, who's the man that's afraid and soft of heart? Yelech v'yoshev lebeisa, let him go home. V'lo yemasis levavecha of kilvavoi, and not to soften and to melt the hearts of the others like his own. Now, what does this mean? So Rabbi Kiva Omer, he says, hayodei b'rachaleibov, when it says the person who's afraid and soft of heart, that's kemashmoi. That means literally a guy who is a coward. The guy cannot stand in the knots of the war. It's too difficult for him to be there in wartime, which is it's in Rashi explains the word kisha melchama is that when they're knotted, standing together, that the enemy doesn't separate them, so the soldiers are like knotted in each other. He can't be validus cherev shluf. He cannot see a sword that's pulled out. That's one interpretation. Simply, it's too difficult for him. Rabbi Shloimy, he says, the one who's afraid and soft of heart, there's someone who's afraid of the sins in his hand. Lefikach, therefore, since the one who's hayare refers to he's afraid of his sins, that's why Tolsa laHaTorah is called Elu. That's what the Torah made all these suspensions of building a house, planting a vineyard, engaged to a woman, that he could go back because of them, meaning that when he's going to be going back, he'll be able to suspend it on, that he has a house that he didn't finish building, or he has a woman that he's engaged to, so that he shouldn't be embarrassed from the sins that he has, because that's really why he's afraid, and that's why he's going back. But Hashem made it that he could cover himself by, he probably has a vineyard that he's planting. On Sunday he was with the grandkids, he's been planting, he has all these different things. So then you could cover. Rabbi Yossi, he says, Amalakan Gadol, the widow to the high priest, a grusha v'chulitz kohen hedyet, ubamzechas nevasin liYisrael, ubasol mamzer nasan. That's Harehu Yada b'Rachaliva. He's the one that's afraid and the soft of heart. Now the Gemara is going to explain what's he disagreeing with Rabbi Yossi. He seems to be saying examples of Aveda Shebeyadai. What's the difference between what he's saying and Rabbi Yossi, and the Gemara is going to explain. Rabbi Yossi. Now the pasuk continues over there. That it was when the officers stopped speaking to the people, and they appointed these generals on the Rosh Ha'am. in front of the people. And, says the Mishnah, uvakeva shalam, and by the heels, meaning in the back of the people, that they would stand, that the ones in the back should not start fleeing. As the Mishnah explains, mamidin zekifin, they would appoint the ones who would stand people up, lifnehem, in front of them, meaning towards the front of where the soldiers were fighting. They would put these strong officers that were appointed for this purposes, that if one of these soldiers would fall, they would stand them up and straighten them up to strengthen the soldiers with their words. And va'achedim, they would put other people, machadim, from behind the officers. Now, v'chashilin shel barzel b'dein. Those who are uncomfortable don't have to listen right now, but they would have these axes of iron in their hands to protect that the officers don't flee. And whoever wants to go back and leave the war, the officer had permission. The literal translation sounds like to cut off his thighs, to cut off his legs. That was what was.
Been that way for centuries.
What?
The Russians were famous for this.
In the war.
When the Russian soldiers they don't want to fight, they would just shoot them with their own soldiers, shoot them down.
Right. So I guess that was a good deterrent to stop them from running away. As the Mishnah continues on Beis, why was this necessary? Because the beginning of running is a downfall, which the Gemara is going to ask. That seems to be exact. The words are opposite. It's really that fleeing is the beginning of falling. So the Mishnah will change it, but that's what it means to say. It means the moment you start running is the moment when everything falls apart. So the last thing we want is people to start running. So they were able to put these officers to say, you're not going anywhere. And that shouldn't be on their mind at all. Like says a pasuk in Shmuel Aleph. It says, Nas Yisrael lefnei Pelishtim. The Jews fled from in front of the Philistines. And Begama gave a gedolah hisabam. And there was also a great plague amongst the people. And later on it says, V'nusu anshi Yisrael ma'mei Pelishtim, that the Jewish men running away from the Philistines, and they had many people that were slain that fell. Again, you see the idea that first comes running, and after the running comes the downfall. Now, continues the Mishnah, but where did we say that these individuals, as we said in the previous Mishnah, that they come back from the war, and there are certain people that don't even leave their home in the first place, and they don't even go out? When did we say these exemptions? That's only by an optional war. That's when there are people that are going to have these exemptions. But when it's a war that's a mitzvah, for example, when they conquered Eretz Yisrael on the days of Yeshua ben Nun, then akol yotzin, then everybody's got to go out. Even the groom from his room, the kalum muchupasa, and the bride from her chuppah, from the wedding canopy, everybody is taken to the war effort. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, he says a different version. It says, and he really says the same thing, and the Gemara is going to discuss what's the difference. So, when we say this, that there are exemptions, Balchamas mitzvah, by a mitzvah war. A Balchamas chayva, but obligatory war. Hakol Yates, everyone's got to go out. Even the chassan from his room and the kala from a chuppah. The Gemara is going to explain what's the difference between him and the Tanna Kama's version. But first, the Gemara explains, Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Yosi had said in his translation of Ayada B'Dach Alevav, he had said that refers to a Monulakan Gadol, and Rabbi Yisai Glili. Rabbi Yisai Glili had said, oh, that refers to Avera Shebeyadai. Isn't that the same thing? Isn't that a Monulakan Gadol just an example of that? So it says the Gemara, the difference between them is Aveda Dirabanan, or rabbinic sin. According to Rabbi Yisai Glili, that his words were just that's any sin, even if it violates rabbinic violations, that's enough to send them back home. Whereas according to Rabbi Yisai, it's only when you violate biblical law, which was the examples he picked of a Malaka and Gadol, for example, when he marries her, where there was an Isser, that's what's going to send them back. So that's a machlekes regarding would a rabbinic sin send the person packing his bags back home. Now, based on this, the Gemara says, "Kaman Ozla Hadatanya." So, according to whom do we learn the following brisa? The brisa says, "Sach bein tefila letefila." if someone spoke between putting on his tefillin shel yad and putting on his tefillin shel rosh, aveda hi b'yadoi, it's a sin in his hand. Meaning, as Rashi explains, if he doesn't go back and say another bracha, as the Gemara says in Menachos Av Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, that if you spoke, you make two brachas. If you didn't speak, you make one bracha. So such a person who spoke and did not make another bracha, that it's a Veda, and it's going to send him packing. He's not going to be able to fight in the war. Come on, who's that like? Says the Gemara Kirbisa Glili, where he holds any isid, even just on a bracha, which is rabbinic, that even that would be enough to send him home. Says the Gemara, Man Tana Lahad Tana Rabbanan. According to whom is the following brayso like? Shama Kol Koronos. If someone hears the sounds of the horns, Virtia, and he trembles. Hagafas Teresin, he hears the clanking of the shields, Virtia, and he starts shaking. Tzich Charavos, and Umayim Shoisen Leal Birkov. He hears all the sounds, and he's has water dripping on his knees, meaning his urine, because he's afraid. So such a person is chayzer. He sent packing his bags back home. Says Gemara, come on. Who's that like? Lema Rabbi Kiva, right? Rabbi Kiva was the one who said literally, it means the guy he's a coward. He can't stand there when he hears all this noise. And not Rabbi Yisrael said it's regarding the sins. Says the Gemara, no. Even regarding that, Rabbi Yisrael would agree. But that's not because of the translation of Ayur B'Dachalevav. That's Moshe the Chassidut, it says at the end of the pasuk, "V'lo yimastis lavav echav kil vavai." He shouldn't melt his brother's hearts like his own heart. This guy is dripping from urine. This is a guy that's going to make everyone else also tremble, because this guy is trembling, and everyone else is going to feed off that negative energy. That's where he's in the packing. But if he was inside like that and no one else saw, then you wouldn't go home. That would only be if it was Abeda Shabiyadeh. So, but therefore, this could even be like Rabbi Yisrael Glili. Now, it said over there in the pasuk that it was when the officers finished, etc., that they were able. Really going in the next part of the Mishnah, that they had officers in the front and the back to chop off their legs in case that they didn't want to fight. Now, the Gemara wonders, what are you saying? The beginning of running is falling. To the contrary, it should say because the beginning of a downfall is running. Because tchilas sounds like it's what causes. And what it should have said is when they're running, that's the beginning of the cause of the downfall. Because by running, it's not applicable a beginning, because that's literally what they're fleeing. So the Gemara says, no, you're right. You should say because the beginning of the downfall is running, and therefore we want to make sure to avoid that, and therefore we have these officers to deter them from doing that. Now the Mishnah concluded by saying a machlekes. When we say all these exemptions, that's only b'melchemes or reshus b'chulu. That's only by a voluntary war. And we had two different versions. But if it's melchemes mitzvah, then everyone goes out. Or Rabbi Yehuda makes a similar distinction. He just uses different words. He said, but melchemes chayva hakol yatzin. So Amar Rabbi Yechanan, he says, reshus dirabanan. When the Rabbanan used the word reshus, meaning in that war that the Chacham said it's voluntary and the Chassan does not go out for, Zuhi mitzvah de Rabbi Yehuda. That's the same thing Rabbi Yehuda said that a Chassan doesn't go out for. It's just Rabbi Yehuda is calling that mitzvah. What's the nafkamina? So that's to exempt him from doing other mitzvahs when he's engaged in that war, like Rav is going to explain. But they both mean the same thing. And when mitzvah de Rabbanan, when the Rabbanan said that everyone has to go out for a mitzvah war, Zuhi chayv de Rabbi Yehuda, that's the same thing Rabbi Yehuda said that everyone has to go out for. He's just calling it chayva. So Rashi just says, on that point, we're not really teaching you anything. It's just because of the first category of Chacham calling it Rishos and Rabbi Yehuda calling it mitzvah. That's where the machlekes is. It's just that since Rabbana called the first thing Rishos, so it's enough for them to call the second station a mitzvah, even though it's obligatory. Because the only thing is just to take it to the next category and to say, this everyone has to go out for. But so Rishos, you could just say one step higher mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda calls the first one mitzvah, because, as we're going to say in one moment, he wants to teach you the concept of isik b'mitzvah, patim in a mitzvah in this category. So then, if you want to take the next one up to the next category to say everyone has to leave, you have to call it a higher definition, which would then be calling it a chayv. But on that, really, there's no difference. Now, Amar Rava, so Rava says, and really Rava is coming to explain the statement of Rabbi Yechanan, and he's coming to say this. Rabbi Yechanan said that the Machlekes Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda by one of the wars is regarding what you call it. What's the nafka mina? Is regarding the halacha of isik b'mitzvah. Because according to one, like we said, it's called a mitzvah. According to one, it's called a rishus. And Rabbi is coming to explain. So regarding which one of them are they disagreeing? He says Milchemes Yeshua lechabish, by the war of Yeshua ben Nun, which was to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Here, no one's going to say that's called rishus. Everyone agrees that that's obligatory, and therefore, of course, if you're engaged in that war, you're going to be patur from other mitzvahs. Now, the Rabbanan weren't concerned to call it chayva because it was enough to them call it a mitzvah, in contrast to the first category that they call it rishus, because we only have to again find it one step higher, and the mitzvah regarding rishus is a step higher. But again, everyone considers Milchemes Yeshua to conquer obligatory. Now, on the other extreme, Milchemes Beis David l'Ravcha, the wars of the Davidic dynasty, which was just for expansiveness, which they fought in Aram Tzova to add on to Eretz Yisrael and all the environs to just get taxes and all the servants and all that, Divrei Kol Rishus. Everyone's going to agree, even Rabbi Yehuda, that's not even a mitzvah. And if you were engaged in that war, you're not part of the mitzvahs. That was optional. When do we have the Machlekes Rabbanan regarding do we qualify it as mitzvah or as rishus? Which, according to that, means Rabbi Yehuda holds you're going to be part of the mitzvah. According to Rabbanan, you're going to be chayav in the mitzvah. Which milchama is that we have a machlekes if it's rishus or if it's mitzvah? If it's lemuute oivdei kachavim deloy leiselayu. If they're trying to minimize the idol worshippers that they don't come onto the Jewish people, that is the type of war which they have the machlekes if it's a preemptive war to conquer their enemies to prevent their potential attack. Ma Rabbi Yehuda is kadel mitzvah. He calls it a mitzvah war. Umar Rabbanan kadel rishus calls it an optional war. Nafkemina, what's the takeaway? Lo'isik b'mitzvah, if you're engaged in the mitzvah, shapatim in mitzvah, the yapatim in mitzvah would be the machlekes. According to Yehuda, you're engaged in a mitzvah, and therefore other mitzvahs that come along, you don't have to fulfill it. According to Rabbanan, no, it's a rishus, and therefore you would not be patur from other mitzvahs. Hanalach Mishol Muchama, we shall return to the 8th parak in Mesechtes, Sotah, parak Mishol Muchama. And with that we begin the 9th parak, parak Egla Rufa, which continues the theme from the 7th parak, which again is continuing on this theme regarding things that are said b'lashon hakodesh. And Egla Rufa is one of those. The decapitated calf is b'lashon hakodesh. It has to be said in lashon hakodesh, meaning what the elders say of the town that's the closest. Yedeinu l'shavcha, our hands did not spill this blood. And the Kohanim that say, Kapel Amchi Yisrael, atone for your people, the Jewish people, these had to be said in the authentic lashon hakodesh that it says in the Torah to say it. Like it says the pasuk in the bottom. It says, Ki matzi chol ba'adama, if you're going to find a dead person on the ground, which Ramah is going to ask, where do you see from this pasuk anything about saying it b'lashon hakodesh? But that's the words that the Mishnah brings. Now, then it says, "V'yatzu zikenecha v'shevtecha." It says that then your elders, your officers, they're gonna, your judges, they're gonna come out. So, how many people is that? That shleish mibezna gadol shel Yerushalayim. There was 3 that would come out from the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. Hayotzin, they would come out and they would come over there. They would measure from the dead person towards the cities in the environs to measure which one is the closest. Now that's the Tanna Kama. He holds there was 3 judges. Rabbi Yehuda, he says chamisha, 5 judges. Shneimah says in the pasuk zikeinecha, your elders. That's shnayim. That's the minimum of plural of is 2. B'shevtecha, your judges. That's going to be shnayim, another 2. Now the thing is in bez and shakel. Now you can't have equal number of judges. Receiving leinoidecha, so you add on another one that's going to make it 5. Now, what happens if nimtza tam and begal? What happens if you find the person buried in a pile of rubble, of stone? Or is hanging on a tree. Or he's floating on the surface of the water. Then lohaya arfin. They wouldn't do the Egla Rufa ceremony in that case if they find a dead person like that. Why? Because Shnemet says the pasuk in Devarim, the pasuk there says, if you're going to find a dead person on the ground that Hashem, your God, gave to you to inherit, that he fell on the field, and you don't know who killed him. So the word is ba'adama, that you find him a dead person on the ground. Now that means v'lo tameh bagal. He's not hidden inside a pile of rubble. You find him there on the ground. Moreover, when it says there in the pasuk that he was noifel basada, he fell on the field, which means say v'lo talabilim, that he's not hanging from a tree. And basada, when it says that he fell on the field, means on ground, below itself, up in the Amayim, and he's not floating on the surface of the water. So you find this guy, the mob hit him, whatever it is, and he's in any one of these positions, it doesn't qualify for the halacha of egla rufa. Now, nimtza samach lesfar. Let's say you find him near the boundary, the border, which Gemara is going to explain the reason for this halacha, or closer to a city that majority are idol worshippers, or to a city that doesn't have a court, then they wouldn't do the egla rufa ceremony. And again, the Gemara is going to explain the source for these halachas. We only do the measuring to a city that has a court. So now, going to the opening halacha, I believe it's 23 that would qualify for that type of bezin. Says the Gemara, Maika Amar. Going back to the opening halacha of our Mishnah that we said that it's said in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Gemara, where do you see from the words of the Mishnah of Ki Yimatzichal Ba'adama anything about being said Lashon HaKodesh? So remember, Bavo says Hachakam, this is what the Mishnah is saying. Shnemat says in the pasuk Va'anu va'amru, that they're going to announce, they're going to say Yedeinu l'shavches adam hazeh, our hands did not spill this blood. Ulahal no'aimer, and elsewhere it says Va'an alavim va'amru b'gaimer, that by the klolis and the brachas they said, the Levim responded and they said, now ma'ani amur lahal, just like they're responding over there as we already established in Perek Zayin was b'lashon hakodesh, avkam b'lashon hakodesh. So over here the va'anu, just like it says va'anu over there, here also means b'lashon hakodesh. That's what the Mishnah then continues and says. So you're right. These are really missing words. Kishanemar is really not going on Egla Ruf B'Lashon Kodesh because the Yimutzachal Bandama is not explaining the halach of B'Lashon Kodesh. You're right. It's first va'anu va'amru, and then when it continues, the Mishnah say, and what's the order of the Egla Ruf? It's like this: Kimatzachal Bandama, when you find the dead person on the ground, and your elders and your judges go out. 3 of the great court of Yerushalayim would come out. That's what the Mishnah is going on, but it's not. That was not the source of the halacha of how it said b'lashon hakodesh. That's learned out from somewhere else, from the word v'anu. Now the Mishnah said a machloikis, how many judges would go out? The Tanna Kama said 3. Yudah mechamisha b'chuli says 5, etc. So what's the understanding of the source of this machloikis? So Tanna learned the brayso. It says in the pasuk v'yatzu zikenecha v'shevtecha, that your elders and your judges, they went out. Now, Zikinecha, that's plural, Shnaim is 2. V'shevtecha and your judges, that's plural, Shnaim, that's 2. Now, V'im Bezin Shakal, we know there cannot be an equal amount of judges, because if there's a disagreement, you have to have that you could be able to tilt it in one way, like the Pasuk says, Acharab Lahatas. You have to go after the majority, but if it's equal, it's not going to be a majority. So we have to make sure it's an odd number. So, obviously, we know from Halacha you have to add on one more. Therefore, there's 5 judges. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Shimon, he says, Zikenecha Shnaim, your elders means 2, and the in Bezin Shakal, you cannot have it equal. So you add another one. That was the Tanna Kama of our Mishnah, which is Rabbi Shimon. There's 3. Says, wait a second, Rabbi Shimon, what does he do with the, like Rabbi Yehuda said, V'shevtecha is another 2 judges. Says, he needs that to teach something else. V'shevtecha is not coming to add on other judges. That's just coming to qualify. It's a qualifier. For the designated ones of the distinguished ones of your judges, meaning the ones of the Lishkas HaGazas of the Sanhedrin. That's what B'Shavtecha is coming to teach you. Not Rabbi Yehuda, Mezikne Zikanecha Nafka. He learns that, of course, he knows it's from the Lishkas HaGazas, because you could have said Zikne, it said, which would have been plural also, and says Zikanecha, your elders, which are the Miyuchad Zikanecha, so he knows that already. So Shavtecha would tell you another 2 judges. Rabbi Shimon tells you no. Because Rahman Ziknei, had it not said Zikanecha, I would have said Afila Ziknei Hashuk. Even the elders in the street, even if they're not even from the Sanhedrin. The Torah tells you your elders, to tell you it has to be from Bezdin. Now, but because the Torah said Zikenecha without Sheftecha, I mean, I would have said, okay, I feel a Sanhedrin Ketana, even from the smallest Sanhedrin, that of 23. Because the says your judges to tell you the Zekenim that are judges of the whole Jewish people, which that teaches you regarding this Sanhedrin. But he would tell you, no, it's not true. You can't tell me that you need Sheftecha because from Zikenecha you would only thought Sanhedrin Ketana because Zikne would mean Zikne Am that are in the Shuk, because Gomer Zikne is Zikne Eda. It says the apasik by Zikne Eda that which is when you do the leaning on the Parhelm Davar Shal Tzibur, when the whole Jewish people commit a sin, it says the word Zikne over there. Now, Ma'al, just like Abadim, Yuchad Shebe'eda is the distinguished ones amongst the Jewish people, which are the Sanhedrin, Avkam Yuchad Shebe'eda. So over here, when it says Zikne, I already know that it's Yuchad Shebe'eda. So therefore, I can't tell I need Sheftecha to tell you that. Therefore, it says no, Sheftecha teaches you another 2 judges. Therefore, it says it's 5, not 3. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Igamar, if you have this Gezerah Shabbat that you just mentioned to learn out Zikne from Zikne or Eda, so the Gamar Lekula Muslim Hasam. So why don't you learn out all the teachings from over there? Because Rabbi Yehuda, as Rashi explains, also holds over there by the Parham Davar Tzibur that you also have to have 5, as the Gemara in the first paragraph in Hadron learns out from Psukim. So Zikanecha v'Shavtecha Lamali. Now why do you even need to have Zikanecha v'Shavtecha to teach you? I already know all the number of judges from over there. So the Gemara says, you're right. Ella, rather, in other words, don't learn out the Gezerah Shava, Zikne, from the Zikne Eda, from the Parhelm Davar Shal Tzibra, because if you did, you would learn everything from there. So we don't have such a Gezerah Shava. Rather, you need Sheftecha to teach you that you're right, like Reb Shimon. I needed to teach me that's going to be Mirchad and Sheftecha, which is a Sanhedrin HaGadol. So wait a second. So if Sheftecha is teaching you that it's the Sanhedrin, where do you get the number 5? You don't have extra with Sheftecha to teach you another 2, because that has to qualify, because else you would have thought it would be Sanhedrin Ketana. So that says the Gemara, it's Vav v'Sheftecha le'minyana. From the Vav of v'Sheftecha, Rabbi Yehuda Darshans, that's come to tell you another number like the other number that we had, which was 2. The Vav is teaching you another counting of another 2. Rabbi Shimon has a continued type of Mem Hey and Aleph, Vav le Mashmle. He doesn't think that the word Vav is going to teach you that idea. So then, my Kamer Achmana. So what is the Torah teaching you then with the word B'Sheftecha? It's only teaching you the distinguished ones. There's not adding on another 2 judges. But then says the Gemara, the final questions are, Elamiyat, if that's the case, so then when it says in Devarim that the Yatsu, that they're going to go out, they are going to go out. Zikenecha, Sheftecha. So you're telling me that every terminology of plural is adding on 2. Zikenecha, 2. Sheftecha, 2. Visheftecha, at least everything is adding on. So Viyatu, they go out. Should also tell you Shnaim, 2 more. And when the pasuk then says further, Umadadu, and they measure, Elo'arim Ashasviv Sachal, to the cities that are closest to the person who died, well, that should also be another Shnaim, another 2. So then Rabbi Yehuda, who started off with 5, Harikan Tisha, you're adding another 4, that should take you to 9. Rabbi Shimon, who started with 3, so you add another 4, Harikan Shiva, that's 7. So you want to know, Hahomi Baile, those words of Viyatsu and Umadadu are needed to teach me something else. We can like learn the Brisa. When it says Viyatsu, they went out, so that's Hein V'lai Shluchehen. That comes to teach you them and not their agents. The court cannot send out any agents to go for them. When it says Umadadu, that they measure, is teaching that they always have to measure. Shafela nimtza ba'alil, even when it's so clear and open that there's no city closer than this city, doesn't make a difference how you might them they would measure, because your mitzvah lasik b'mandid, it's a mitzvah to measure, to be engaged in the measuring. That itself is a mitzvah. That's where the Yatsu and Umadu come to teach you, and therefore it doesn't add on another 2 and another 2. But again, all the other terminologies are discussed in possibilities of adding on. That's why the machlek is if it's 3 judges or 5 judges. Thank you to any time.